For a teacher in Arizona, just one single complaint can be the start of a really long, confusing, and potentially career-ending journey. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the Department of Education's disciplinary process. We're going to see how it works, what's really at stake, and some tough lessons that, honestly, every educator should know. Just imagine it for a second. Everything you've worked for, your entire professional life, is suddenly put on trial. Now, for Arizona teachers, this isn't just a metaphor, but the process they go through, it's not like any courtroom you've ever seen on TV. The rules are totally different, but the stakes, they are just as high. And believe me, the outcome can follow you forever. All right, so to really get a grip on this whole process, we've got to start at the beginning, with the fundamentals. What kind of behavior can actually get a teacher in hot water? Well, the answer is a whole lot more complicated than you might think. Let's dig into the ground rules. So in Arizona, you've got the Department of Education, the DOE, and they're basically the gatekeeper. They're the ones who give out teaching certificates, but they're also the ones who can take them away. It's their job to look into any accusation that might call a teacher's professional conduct into question. Now, some of the rules are pretty much exactly what you'd expect. The law talks about unprofessional or immoral conduct, and this covers the really serious stuff. Criminal acts, fraud, illegal drugs. These are the clear, bright lines that nobody's going to argue with. But here's where it gets interesting, and frankly, a little nerve-wracking if you're an educator. See, the DOE's authority doesn't just stop with crimes. There's this whole other category of misconduct, and it's defined by a surprisingly vague and incredibly powerful rule. Just take a look at the wording here. This isn't my summary. This is a direct quote from the state law. And it creates this massive gray area. I mean, think about it. What does it actually mean to discredit the teaching profession? The law doesn't say. It leaves it totally wide open to interpretation. This vague little phrase basically creates a catch-all net. It lets the board discipline teachers for things that aren't illegal, that aren't explicitly forbidden, but that someone, somewhere, decides has discredited the profession. For teachers, this just creates a huge amount of uncertainty. It's tough to know exactly where the line is. So what happens when a complaint actually gets filed? Okay, let's walk through what that initial investigation phase looks like, step by step. Once a complaint comes in, the whole machine just starts turning. An investigator gets assigned to start digging for evidence. They're going to interview people, look at documents. The teacher who's at the center of all this gets a chance to give their side of the story. But this right here is a huge fork in the road, because if that investigator thinks there's enough evidence, the whole case gets handed over to the attorney general, who can then file a formal complaint. And that takes things to a whole new level. Once that formal complaint is filed, the case heads to a hearing. But I'm telling you, this is not the kind of hearing you see in the movies. It has its own very unique setup and its own rules. The main event goes down before a group called the Professional Practices Advisory Committee, or PPAC for short. And this committee, it's right at the heart of the whole disciplinary process. Okay, this slide right here. This might be the single most shocking discovery for a lot of teachers. In a regular court of law, right, there's super strict rules about what can be used as evidence. But in a PPA hearing, all those rules pretty much go out the window. And that means hearsay, we're talking rumors, he said, she said stuff. It can actually be presented as evidence. This just dramatically shifts the ground right out from under the teacher's feet. So, the PPAC's job is to act like a combination of judge and jury. They look at everything, they decide what the facts are, and then they make a judgment. But, and this is a really important distinction, they don't get the final say. They only make a recommendation. That recommendation then gets sent up the ladder to the State Board of Education, and they hold all the cards. They can take what the PPAC said and run with it, they can throw it out completely, or they can just change the punishment. A teacher's entire career is ultimately in their hands. Which brings us to the stakes of this whole game. A final decision from the board isn't just about one job. It can literally define the rest of a teacher's professional life. The consequences can range from serious to absolutely catastrophic. On the lower end, you've got a letter of censure, which is basically a permanent black mark on your record. More severe is a suspension, where you lose your teaching certificate for a period of time. And then, at the top, there's full-on revocation. Your license is just gone. Your teaching career is over. And listen, any of these punishments aren't just a temporary slap on the wrist. They become a permanent part of your professional record. But it doesn't just stay in Arizona. Oh no, the story doesn't end there. The state board is actually required to report these disciplinary actions to a national database. And that's the final, brutal piece of this puzzle. That record will follow you anywhere. If you ever try to get a teaching license in another state, that mark from Arizona is going to pop right up. So a local complaint all of a sudden has nationwide consequences, effectively chaining you to that one decision. So, given how complicated this all is and how incredibly high the stakes are, what's the big takeaway for any educator who finds themselves in this situation? The source material we're looking at is very, very direct on this. It says the single most important thing an educator can do is talk to an attorney who has specific experience in education law. And why is that so critical? Well, think about it. A regular lawyer might not get this unique world. An education law specialist, though, they know the ins and outs of an APPAC hearing, where hearsay is on the table and the rules are completely different. They can help you navigate the mess and give you the best possible shot at protecting your career in a system that plays by its own very unconventional rules. Which leaves us with one last big question. In a system where a vaguely worded rule can be just as powerful as a criminal law and where your entire career can be decided by a committee that doesn't even follow normal court rules, who really holds the power? The teacher or the system itself?